Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that the most powerful nation on Earth has simply stopped existing. No government, no protection, no economy. The cities are still standing, but the system is gone. That is exactly how the Western Roman Empire disappeared. Not with one giant explosion or a final legendary battle, but with a slow, silent collapse that most people living through it barely even understood. Rome once ruled millions of people across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Its roads stretched for thousands of miles, its armies were nearly unbeatable, and its laws shaped how societies functioned. People believed Rome was eternal. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," was not poetry, it was dominance. But empires rarely die overnight. They rot from the inside, and Rome's decay began long before the final year. Political instability was one of the first deep cracks. Emperors were assassinated, replaced, betrayed, and overthrown so often that power became a gamble instead of a responsibility. Generals controlled armies, armies controlled emperors, and loyalty vanished. During a period known as the Crisis of the 3rd century, more than 20 emperors ruled within roughly 50 years. Imagine a country changing leadership every couple of years. Chaos becomes normal, corruption spreads, and long-term decisions disappear. Leaders focus on surviving instead of governing, and when leadership becomes temporary, the nation becomes fragile.
At the same time, the economy began to collapse. Rome had built its wealth on constant expansion. Gold, slaves, land, and resources kept flowing as long as conquests continued. But once expansion slowed, the income stopped. Taxes increased, inflation rose, currency lost value, and trade weakened. Ordinary citizens suffered the most. Farmers abandoned land because taxes were unbearable. The middle class shrank, and wealth concentrated among elites. Economic imbalance does not just create poverty, it destabilizes the entire structure of society. The military, which once defined Roman strength, also began to weaken. Maintaining such a vast territory required enormous funding and manpower. Recruitment declined, discipline faded, and Rome increasingly relied on mercenaries, foreign soldiers who fought for money, not loyalty. When an army fights for payment instead of belief, dedication disappears. Borders stretched too wide, enemies attacked from multiple sides, and defenses thinned. Rome was not suddenly facing stronger enemies, it was becoming weaker internally.
Social changes added another layer of decline. Civic pride and public duty slowly faded. Citizens who once saw service as honor grew detached. Entertainment, luxury, and distraction replaced discipline and responsibility. Massive public spectacles kept people occupied while deeper issues went ignored. A civilization survives on shared belief, and once that belief weakens, cracks widen rapidly. External pressures intensified everything. Migrating tribes like the Visigoths, Vandals, and Ostrogoths moved toward Roman territory, many pushed westward by the aggressive expansion of the Huns. These were not just invasions, they were massive population movements. Rome sometimes allowed these groups to settle within its borders, but poor treatment, broken promises, and exploitation turned potential allies into rebels. The sack of Rome in 410 shocked the world. The city had not been successfully invaded in nearly 800 years. It was not only physical destruction, it was psychological proof that Rome was no longer untouchable. Another sack followed in 455, reinforcing vulnerability. Confidence is invisible, yet essential, and once people lose faith, fear spreads faster than armies. By the late 5th century, the Western Empire was barely functioning. Real power shifted to military commanders, while emperors became symbols rather than leaders. In 476, a Germanic chieftain removed the last Roman emperor without a dramatic war, without fireworks, without a cinematic ending, just a quiet removal of authority. The most powerful empire of its time did not explode, it faded. The fall was not sudden because warnings had existed for centuries. Leaders patched problems instead of solving them. Temporary fixes created long-term damage, and unity kept dissolving. A major turning point came when the empire was divided into eastern and western halves to make governance easier. On paper, it seemed strategic: 2 administrations, 2 capitals, better control. In reality, the eastern half became wealthier and more stable, while the western half struggled. Division created imbalance, and imbalance created vulnerability. Bureaucracy also grew heavy. Layers of officials multiplied, corruption became easier, and accountability became harder. Citizens felt disconnected from government. Agriculture declined, farmland was overused, innovation slowed, and small farmers were crushed by taxes and competition from elite estates. Many abandoned rural life and crowded into cities. Unemployment rose, and food insecurity increased. Identity itself began to blur. Rome once thrived on discipline, unity, and shared values, but rapid expansion without effective integration created fragmentation. Religious transformation shifted priorities, plagues reduced populations, and external threats never stopped. By the time reform was truly needed, momentum of decline was already too strong. What makes Rome's fall haunting is that many people living through it did not realize it was happening. Markets still opened, people still worked, and buildings still stood. Collapse in reality looks less like destruction and more like gradual irrelevance. Systems stop functioning long before they officially disappear. Rome did not fall because enemies were unstoppable. It fell because its strength became unsustainable. Expansion without balance, wealth without fairness, power without stability, and diversity without unity created a structure too heavy to support itself. And when the final page turned, it did not feel like an ending. It felt like silence after a story people had already stopped reeling.
What makes the story even more unsettling is that after the Western Empire faded, life did not suddenly become empty or apocalyptic. People still woke up, worked, traded, married, and raised children. The buildings were still there, the roads still connected cities, and many laws still functioned. That is why the fall of Rome did not feel like a single disaster, but more like a slow change of reality. Authority simply shifted from emperors to local rulers, generals, and tribal kings. Power became regional instead of centralized, and the idea of one united empire quietly dissolved. This transition marked the beginning of what later historians would call the early Middle Ages, a period often misunderstood as total darkness, when in truth it was more of a transformation than a complete collapse. The eastern half of the empire, centered in Constantinople, continued to survive and even thrive for nearly 1,000 more years, preserving Roman law, architecture, and knowledge, while the West fragmented into smaller kingdoms. The legacy of Rome never truly vanished. Its language evolved into the Romance languages. Its legal systems influenced modern courts. Its engineering inspired infrastructure, and its military strategies shaped future warfare. Even today, concepts like republic, senate, and civic law echo Roman foundations.
The most powerful lesson hidden inside this history is that collapse rarely comes from a single enemy or one catastrophic mistake. It comes from accumulation, small, ignored problems stacking year after year until the system can no longer carry its own weight. Rome teaches that strength without adaptability becomes rigidity, wealth without distribution becomes resentment, expansion without integration becomes fragmentation, and leadership without accountability becomes corruption. Civilizations survive not because they are invincible, but because they continuously repair themselves. When repair stops, decline accelerates. Another overlooked truth is that fear and misinformation also played roles. Rumors of invasions, economic panic, and loss of trust in currency caused people to hoard resources and withdraw participation, which further weakened stability. When citizens stop believing in the future of their system, they unintentionally speed up its decline. Psychological collapse often arrives before physical collapse, and once confidence disappears, recovery becomes exponentially harder. Environmental factors, such as shifting climate patterns, may have reduced agricultural output in certain regions, forcing migrations and increasing competition for resources. While these changes alone would not destroy an empire, they added pressure to an already strained structure. Every empire in history eventually faces similar crossroads, moments where reform either strengthens foundations or hesitation widens fractures. Rome hesitated too often, choosing short-term comfort over long-term restructuring, and by the time decisive action was needed, the momentum of decline was already too strong. Yet the fall of Rome is not only a warning, it is also proof of endurance. Even after political authority vanished, Roman culture, philosophy, engineering, and governance models continued influencing the world for centuries. Universities studied Roman texts, architects copied Roman designs, and governments borrowed Roman legal principles. This shows that while empires can disappear, their ideas can outlive them by millennia. The true ending of Rome was not destruction, but diffusion. Its power scattered into countless nations, shaping them indirectly instead of ruling them directly. That is why the fall of Rome remains one of the most studied events in human history, not because it was the loudest collapse, but because it was the quietest reminder that no system is guaranteed permanence. And the difference between longevity and downfall often lies in whether a society chooses to adapt, repair, and stay united before the weight of its own success becomes too heavy to carry. And in the end, what truly closed the chapter of the Western Roman Empire was not fire, not one final war, and not a dramatic cinematic ending. It was acceptance. People slowly adjusted to a new reality where Rome was no longer the center of power. Local kings replaced emperors, regional laws replaced imperial commands, and loyalty shifted from a distant capital to nearby rulers who could actually provide protection. Life continued, which is why the fall did not feel like the end of the world. It felt like the world quietly changing shape. The Eastern Roman Empire, later known as the Byzantine Empire, continued for nearly 1,000 more years, proving that Rome as an idea was stronger than Rome as a political structure. Its knowledge, architecture, and legal systems were preserved, copied, and spread across continents. The true ending of Rome was not destruction, but diffusion. Its power scattered into different cultures, languages, and governments, shaping them indirectly instead of ruling them directly. Latin evolved into Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Romanian. Roman law influenced modern justice systems. Roman engineering inspired bridges, aqueducts, and road networks still studied today. Even political words like Senate, Republic, and citizen trace their roots back to Roman foundations. The empire fell, but its blueprint survived, quietly guiding the future long after its banners were lowered. The final lesson hidden in Rome's story is both simple and unsettling. No civilization collapses from one single cause, and no civilization is guaranteed permanence. Strength without adaptability becomes rigidity. Wealth without fairness breeds resentment. Expansion without unity creates fragmentation. Leadership without accountability invites corruption. Rome did not fall in a day. It declined through centuries of ignored warnings, temporary fixes, and loss of shared purpose. By the time the last emperor was removed, the structure had already hollowed from within. What history remembers as a fall was really the last step of a long descent. And that is why the story of Rome never truly ends. It serves as a mirror for every powerful society that believes it is untouchable, a reminder that survival is not about dominance, but about the ability to adapt, repair, and stay united before success itself becomes the weight that brings everything down.